So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming and joining our session on strategy execution. We're here in partnership with our WorkBoard colleagues. I'll hand it over to Ghaleb to give us a quick introduction, and then I'll kick off the presentation.
Hello, everyone. Really happy you could all join us today. My name is Ghaleb Masri. I'm the managing director and partner of ADAPTOVATE, based here out of Toronto. With me on the panel today, we've got Carlos, who kicked us off. Carlos Pena is based out of our LA office. And with us, we have Rene, VP of Partnerships from WorkBoard, and Kamran Amjadi, SVP of Alliances and Partnerships from WorkBoard. So welcome, everyone. We will be kicking off shortly today on our topic of strategy execution management and GenAI. We've all been immersed globally in all the developments around AI and more specifically GenAI and how accessible and impactful that's been in the last 18 or 24 months or so. It may come as no surprise that's extended into the field of strategy execution, which is the focus of our work here at ADAPTOVATE and also our partners at WorkBoard. So we're going to cover some of the ways it is manifesting in that regard and how WorkBoard is also applying it in their specific product suite. So Carlos, over to you.
Thank you, Ghaleb. I appreciate it. And also one note to start, please, if you have any questions, can you please put them in the webinar chat and make sure you're chatting to everyone. I'll be looking at the questions in the chat regularly, and we'll make sure we get to them by the end of the session. So we appreciate any interactions and questions so we can address them. So we'll start with the presentation here. There's no need to tell anyone here about today's market environment. It's really dynamic, always changing. And we found that during these turbulent and dynamic times, that successful businesses are businesses that incorporate agile rhythms into their operations. Agile rhythms can be characterized by two sets of activities. The first is executive activities, and the second is manager level activities. Executives, they're charged with setting the direction, the enterprise strategy, and creating those annual, longer term objectives. And they hand those off to managers. And now this is where most of that agile rhythm comes into play, where managers take those annual objectives and organizational direction, and they break those down into shorter term plans. They break down the work for the different teams or departments. They structure how they deliver on those outcomes. They measure the progress and impact of that delivery, and then they adapt. And they adapt based on what they measured, and then they rejig their plans and they move forward. So the goal is to essentially making sure we close this loop to make sure that the work being delivered and the lessons learned goes back into informing the direction of the organization. And the faster and more accurate manner we go through this loop, the more successful a business becomes at responding to market changes. However, there are typically challenges associated with achieving this agile rhythm. The first being sometimes there's a misdirected strategy. It's not exactly the right direction the organization should be going. Sometimes managers lack alignment. There's a bit of a struggle translating that strategy into the work the operations team should be doing. There's a lack of effectiveness on the part of managers to bring in the right people to tackle these problems and to deliver the outputs that they need to deliver. And there's lack of clarity amongst the teams on how they need to collaborate and how their work actually impacts the overall strategy. And then there's a slow or incomplete operating cadence, meaning they fail to actually close this loop to take those lessons learned from what their progress has been into the planning for the next cycle, for the next quarter, for the next year. So as we can see, the managers are the critical link between the executives setting the strategy and the individual contributors. It's the manager's job to translate the strategy, to drive accountability for the outputs and value delivery that they're meant to achieve, and to adapt the operations and the work of the team to meet the vision and the purpose set by the executives. So how can managers do this? Well, it requires a shift in traditional behaviors and mindsets that managers have. First, it starts with having this continuous learning mindset. This learning enables adaptation, which becomes a competitive advantage. Along those same lines, we take those learnings to iterate on how we deliver, iterate on what we deliver, iterate on the norms and customs that we're used to operating in. Managers must also keep an outcome focus. So they hypothesize based on how they can achieve those best outcomes, and they test those hypotheses. And again, this goes back to the learning bit. You learn from that hypothesis and you move forward. We also see that managers need to develop more dynamic and cross-functional collaboration mechanisms. That is because the challenges today, sometimes we can't foresee, and sometimes our teams aren't structured in a way to best tackle those new challenges. So we need to create dynamic teams to be able to confront those head on. Then the managers must be able to inform their teams through transparent and free flow information. This enables teams to make decisions about how to best create and deliver their value. And finally, managers must leverage the tools available to them to help all this happen and to drive this through to execution. And those tools include GenAI and automation. If those middle managers achieve all of this, we see better alignment, meaning their workforce is much more aligned to the strategy. So you're actually seeing much more productive workforce, and they end up being much more engaged in their work, and they can see the purpose in what they're doing every day. You create higher accountability. Due to that regain in capacity of the lost workforce, we can now become more productive and efficient in delivering on strategy. So we see that strategy execution happen faster and decisions being able to be made much more quickly as we're closing that loop much faster as well. And finally, the managers are just plain and simple more effective. You see their executives are happy because they're seeing progress with their strategy execution, and their teams and departments are happy because they're much more engaged in their work. And that is the hallmark of an effective manager. So, and then how can we break this down into capabilities that a manager has so that they can achieve all these outcomes? We've developed a strategy execution matrix of 3 different elements that helps managers excel. The first is, again, defining strategy. How can we clearly translate the executive vision into organizational strategy, into departmental and shorter term strategy and objectives that can give everyone a clear path forward that is visible as well? The next is driving execution. After we have that strategy, how do we form teams around the tasks that need to be done? How can we create metrics, both progress metrics and impact metrics, leading and lagging indicators about how we best move forward? And how do we create accountability? Those inner working processes, the agile rhythm, how to close that loop so that we can continually work, deliver value, adjust as needed, and then continue moving forward. So as we see, managers, in order to move from left to right on this matrix, they embrace agile rhythms, and then they leverage available platforms to support that strategy execution. And I'll hand it over to Ghaleb there to talk a little bit more about those platforms.
Thanks, Carlos. Thanks for leading us through that portion there. And just to build on what you've shared already and why it's important that we wanted to cover it in this sequence, it always begins with people and then moving towards process and technology or tooling. If the mindset shift required isn't established, there really is a very uphill battle towards adoption and maximizing the most out of the desired behaviors, actions, and investments in tooling that you require. And my WorkBoard colleagues and fellow panelists are nodding their head because I know we all believe the same. And I think that's why it's really important to stress what you covered earlier, Carlos, around executives, management, the key role they play towards the team and how to enable that towards becoming an organization with a more agile operating rhythm and growing in time towards one that's best in class. And as you move from left to right, that's where you can really begin to more significantly get benefits and value from the technology and the tooling that you're looking to use. So moving forward and talking a bit more, if you could take us to the next slide, Carlos, I'll cover a little bit about the platform itself. And I really like the concept here of systems of record. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll find the transaction and activity systems you might be familiar with that are in most organizations. You'll have some kind of system of record for financials or the general ledger, one for CRM, customer relationship management, Salesforce, or others. Within IT, there are several. One could be around your assets, your asset database, the CMDB, and so on, and the list goes on. So this is really to help govern and track activities within a function and the important data related to that. On the right-hand side, you've got the different systems of record around people. How do you people plan and how do you allocate resources to get the activities done on the left-hand side within functions? But there's a big black hole in the middle, literally and figuratively. And that is the system of record around strategy execution. So how do you flow people, resources, funding, and other from right to left to the activities that you need in those different functions? How do you manage strategy execution? How do you manage progress against that plan? How are you aware of what the team and what the organization has done to reach the goals required at a certain frequency? And can you trust the data on its execution? How can you report on what's being accomplished and is it meaningful? So let's probe a bit further on this black hole that exists around a system of record for strategy execution and what's important that exists to be there and to help address it. So beginning with the top right-hand quadrant, and let's go through this clockwise, what you'll want to have is initially long-range strategies. You'll want to be able to capture the long-range strategies that point towards the direction the organization wants to achieve. Information here will be on the key strategic priorities and outcomes, what the investments are, where the organization wants to play, how they intend to win, and having that strategy on the page for easy dissemination and cascading. Moving to the next quadrant, that long-range strategy needs to then be converted into more concrete outcomes in the form of objectives and key results on different timeframes and shorter timeframes in that 3 to 5 year period. So looking here towards annual or quarterly outcomes there. And this begins to then decompose into the elements of a roadmap and a plan. This moves then from the executive area that Carlos was previously mentioning to the manager area, because that's where the work gets done, the managers and the teams. So those objectives and key results need to be translated into work streams and actions. That takes us to the third quadrant, the one in the bottom left-hand side. Actions. Actions drive results. Actions need to be clear. They need to be aligned. Dependencies need to be managed. And typically the time frame here is not on the order of a year or a quarter, but rather on the order of a week or two or a month, depending on the appropriate cadence and type of work for that team and the organization. And then going beyond the actions and the roadmap of getting that work done, you go to the last quarter, which is going down to the team and individual level. So what is the scorecard? What are the reviews? What are the leading and lagging indicators that are enabling us to know what progress is being made? So you can see moving from right to left, how we can go from the highest level and the highest order outcome really down to the most granular, where the work is being done at the team level. And how do you capture all of this? How do you keep track of it across the different timeframes and across the different levels of the organization where this exists? Well, let's go a little bit forward and talk about how GenAI is helping dramatically beyond the existing value you'd have for a system of record. WorkBoard, of course, has a great system that supports in this and can act in that way. And what I think is really cool are some of the GenAI capabilities that have been introduced to make it a lot easier. We support organizations through this change, through the people and process part of it. And there are some really cool features here from a platform perspective that help accelerate and support that mindset and process change. So On OKRs, when organizations typically are beginning to understand how to think in objectives and key results, it's a muscle that needs to be developed. Typically, organizations will move from status updates to these outcome-oriented updates, and that requires a change in thinking and framing. The process of not only thinking differently, but then authoring the OKRs can be difficult and even tedious at first for some. And oftentimes we will usually take pen to paper and help our clients write it by writing it ourselves for them. So typing it with them as they are beginning to think about and brainstorming what to do. Well, some cool features here that really helps is you can actually input OKRs that are coming from higher up, so the strategic priorities or your organization strategy, into WorkBoard, and WorkBoard can help produce what the OKRs would be for your team. And not only produce those OKRs, but then help you fine-tune them further. Let's be more specific. Let's be more ambitious. Let's change the orientation of how we're writing this. So that's one way that really accelerates that writer's block that can typically exist when you're first practicing and developing and getting better at writing OKRs. So that also helps in terms of the cascade, because you can take the existing OKRs at a higher level and convert it to what's meaningful for you. What's also really cool is it can quickly scan and assess and gather intelligence from the team's past OKRs and improvement actions in the form of retrospective to be able to make sure that the next set of OKRs are more realistic or addressing some of the improvement points, or at least factoring them in when they're being produced. So all in all, this really can help accelerate the OKR creation process and also improve quality to get teams going and the organization going and thinking this way. Moving forward to the next cool feature we'd like to cover is, okay, so teams have now created their OKRs and they're beginning to work and execute against them. Key benefit of doing OKRs in the Agile operating rhythm is really in transparency, alignment, and the process of achieving that, which is through communication. At the end of the day, you want people talking to people, teams talking to teams in a more structured and organic way. What's cool about this is the GenAI functionality can help identify, based on the OKRs and the action plans, what dependencies there might be between teams and other teams in an organization. What are those cross-org relationships that exist based on the OKRs that are articulated and that are in this system of record? This can help proactively identify where there might be duplicate work in the organization, that's waste, or where there might be dependencies that need to be carefully managed because there's a critical path in the delivery required. So it helps prevent collisions and surprises that undercut team and company outcomes. And beyond that, of course, with GenAI functionality, we all know it's really good at summarization. So that, of course, is also available and can be produced. Typically, as organizations go through the maturity curve, quarter on quarter, going through quarterly Agile rhythm, you don't get very good at identifying dependencies and acting on them from the very first quarterly operating rhythm. The initial one is really about increasing transparency. So this is a way to also help accelerate some of that typical maturity curve teams go through a little bit earlier. Moving to the next feature, it's about mobilizing the team and the roadmap and the action plan faster. So really here, there's a co-author functionality, which is pretty neat, which also can help co-author what the action items should be from the OKRs. And really there, also helping accelerate the time and effort it would take from the team to move towards execution beyond the initial staging phase. So this is also really helpful in that regard. And as I'm going through this, you can see we're also following the logical path from the top level strategic priority, or where the interface is from the executive level to the manager level, to teams articulating their outcomes, to now moving into execution and the action plan. Let's cover the next feature here. So faster, better decisions. How can we all maximize team time or managerial time? We know that's at a premium. So here it's also about getting concise summaries from your system of record based on the OKRs that matter to you and your team and the progress that's being executed against them, to understand where you really are. Where are the points where you would need to focus more on as a manager to help support the team and remove impediments based on the intended progress? Where are the areas that are progressing well towards the objectives and the key results articulated? In a way, this helps provide executive briefings as well. As we all know, bringing executives to the table, even with best intentions, can be very difficult to look at the progress of the team and getting into the system of record itself. So a way we often have to do it is, of course, providing executives with summaries that fit their mode of consumption and fit their time constraints. And with this, you can bypass the sometimes arduous task of repurposing the information into a specific PowerPoint or an Excel that the leadership follows. Here, summaries are created and they can be adjusted, and they can also go into the tools that the organization uses for their reporting. So that's a nice additional benefit there from a communication perspective. And then probably the one I'm most excited about, and there's several we're covering really quickly here, is how this helps support managers. A big part of the coaching that we do is really around high-performing teams and enabling managers to play a key role in that. And a lot of the points of leverage that managers have are through their one-to-one interactions and coaching sessions with their team members. We all know how busy it is in today's organizations with how fast things move. It can be an issue sometimes where managers are not as prepared as they would like to be for those one-to-ones and coaching conversations. And therefore, being able to get a one-to-one impact summary based on the work being done, the progress and the scorecard of the individual in the format of the situation, the behavior, and the impact, so really supporting a coaching conversation, can make those discussions a lot more fruitful and productive. So this is one I'm really excited about because I do think that can help leverage a lot of returns for managers and for teams in being able to better focus those conversations and better prepare managers for those conversations with their team members. And then retros. So retros are a great opportunity for teams to look back and discuss and analyze and assess and then agree on what the improvements are that they'd like to make with regards to their ways of working. And what's nice here is this is the system of record, as we mentioned, so you can combine how we're working and the what we're working on to better improve the next cycle of OKRs and what you'd like to do. So this will help easily capture the information in a retro. It'll help categorize it and cluster the different ideas. It'll also help look back to history. How often do we look back to things that we wanted to do and sometimes miss following up on them the next time we do it? So this will go back to the past retros and also help hold the team accountable in terms of, did we look to improve what we agreed we would improve last quarter or last increment, and then bring it in. And this can help make the OKRs a bit more realistic and also focused on how we're going to execute, not just what we're going to execute on. It's really convenient from that perspective. So this was a little bit of a helicopter view of some of the different GenAI features. The platform WorkBoard is much more broader than that. We really wanted to highlight some of the GenAI functionality that we think is exciting and we think is adding value to the conversations team members and managers and executives are having in an organization around delivery. And what we thought we could do is hand it over to Kamran, who could also help share some of the recent feedback they're getting from clients around this and how it's being used.
Awesome. Thanks, Ghaleb. Hello, everyone. So with regards to GenAI, a lot of the kind of in the public media when we're hearing what's the impact everybody is looking for is productivity. So are we going to be more productive? Am I writing that email faster? Is something kind of like reducing the amount of time that it takes? But in our circles, when we talk to leaders about the impact of GenAI, specifically in the category that we operate, which is strategy execution, they're looking to basically for, can I run my business better? Can I run my business better than my competitor? So that's kind of the lens that leaders are looking when they're looking at the use of GenAI in strategy execution. And the stories that we have around, the few that we have in here on the screen, let's starting with GHX. So GHX is the largest business community in healthcare. They connect supply chain, finance, and clinical professionals with suppliers and their partners. They're a private equity-backed company, Tina being their CEO. They have about 1,000 employees. And we selected different size organizations to share you with what's going on in here. And Tina has a very strong sentiment around WorkBoard that, basically she couldn't, she says, I can't run my business without WorkBoard. It'd be a lot slower. I need the data to be able to navigate the changes. So she actually starts her days with a WorkBoard scorecard of the initiatives that she's tracking for her organization. She runs her one-on-ones in WorkBoard because it pulls in the data for whatever it is that those leaders are have taken responsibility for and have said that they're going to be accountable for. And what, in terms of GenAI, what she actually helped communicate to us, which was one of the genesis of what we did, is she wanted this stuff to become an executive brief for her every morning. When she goes in, she has a brief in terms of, here's what it is. And that GenAI capability that we built in looks at OKRs, it looks at work streams, it looks at kind of like the focus of the team and gives her a summary where she doesn't have to go in there and read all the data. It's actually been, managed for her. And her chief people officer is now using the manager effectiveness tools that Ghaleb just showed you to actually roll it out, looking at strategy execution being at the area where actually the middle managers are really the drivers of, and how do we give them the tools to be able to coach their teams to be more effective and more driving results more in a more agile way. So Steve Schaefer here at A.O. Smith has actually taken WorkBoard into his second company. He started with us at 3M, where he ran the aerospace and automotive business unit of 3M. And while he was there, we actually introduced our first GenAI capabilities. And when he saw it, it was like his first introduction to what GenAI was doing, and he was very contemplative and sat there. I was in the meeting with him, and after a while, his assessment was, if you don't have your strategy execution data in a digital format such that GenAI can actually process this data and give you insights, then you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage against those folks that are doing it. That was his assessment in the first time that he saw it. And when he moved from 3M recently to A.O. Smith is one of the largest manufacturers of water heaters. They're actually in the kind of water business. They have 12,000 employees. They're on the S&P 500. He's the president there. He took it there and he's deploying it across A.O. Smith as well. At Avery Dennison, new client, 35,000 employees. Everybody who thinks of Avery Dennison thinks, oh, they're the printer labels that are, at Staples or, some office supply store. In fact, they're way different than that. They have so many technologies for the design, manufacture, and basically materials for branding, labeling, identification. Every shoe that's out there has some, version of their stuff somewhere in the kind of like bowels of that shoe. So the team that's there, actually they presented at our customer conference, and they had, some really good stats. The one that we put on the screen in here was, the prep time for their MBRs, right? When the data is always live, when there is a single source of truth, then your prep time for the MBRs, in this case, they reduced it by 80%. Right? And that's time gained for other productive activities. The other thing that was really interesting, and actually, I think a critical stat, is that 43% of their senior leadership deprioritized outcomes that they had teams were signed up to deliver. So as they looked at the focus of where they wanted to achieve results, they were able to identify things that they were going to deprioritize to have more time and resources for the things that were really critical to achieve. And that transparency is critical to see, and the ability to make that kind of shift fast is only able to happen when stuff is digital and when there's a single source of truth in the organization for strategy execution. And one other example that we didn't put on here, but actually it was in one of Carlos's slides in terms of executing strategy faster in a shorter time period. And it was with VMware. VMware actually was an enterprise-wide customer prior to them becoming getting acquired by Broadcom. And they were doing a massive transformation going from on-premise to SaaS. They had 60 different companies that they had acquired. Each one was running their own. So they set up an office of strategy execution under the CEO. And that leader basically drove the implementation of WorkBoard across all of VMware. They were planning on achieving their transformation in 3 years. They achieved it in 2 years. And that was an amazing result that they did. And they also identified duplicate work everywhere, and they consolidated that work. Through that, created new resources that they could use. So there's a lot of stories that we can share with you if you guys are interested. If you go into the next slide, Carlos, and I also just wanted to touch base that WorkBoard is industry agnostic, right? Strategy execution doesn't change going from a tech company to a biotech company to a financial company. Ultimately, strategy execution is all around alignment, transparency, focus, as well as velocity, right? So those are the same things that every company in terms of strategy execution wants to achieve.
Yeah, thank you, Kamran. We appreciate you closing us out, and like to just thank Tammy for her comment about not underestimating the time that exec summaries take. And yeah, we absolutely agree. And having any tools that can condense and make that information readily available so those senior individuals can more easily collate instead of hunting down this information, making sure there's consistency across the information they're receiving, dramatically cuts the time down to create these powerful executive summaries that are actually useful for decision making as well. So yeah, thank you for your comment, and definitely appreciate it.
And if anybody would like to get a follow-up, please reach out to the ADAPTOVATE team, and we're happy to do a full demo of WorkBoard along with ADAPTOVATE and kind of answer any questions that you may not want to share publicly, and would like to kind of share with us, in a maybe closed meeting.
Yeah, and we do have a hand up. So Igor, I think I'm gonna allow you to make your comment in 1 second here. Go ahead.
Thank you. It was really interesting presentation. I do appreciate, because I'm also on AI, doing some courses on this and trying to make it for work to Agile transformation. So my question is how to make it work if we have some kind of resistance, maybe group resistance, and or some top management resistance. So what would you suggest how to use the AI tool to to win, to make a small success, small stories of winning in a short period of time? Thank you.
Igor, thanks a lot for your question. Maybe I'll take this up initially, and then I can welcome my panelists to also join. Igor, I think what's really cool about your question, and more specifically the topic of AI, GenAI, and also Agile, is that we see them as both being new ways of working. And when looking at new ways of working, whether it's agility or using GenAI to reimagine the way you approach your work and the processes and the way you look at your work and the tools available to it, I think the starting point is still the same. It still begins with what is the mindset that I or the organization have and our willingness in being able to apply this new ways of working to find what works best for our organization, our specific DNA, and get the better outcomes. And then in approaching the mindset, where do you begin and how do you begin? And what we usually advise is find a coalition of the willing, no matter how small or where it may be. Think in terms of bite-sized pilots, and I think that was part of your question stem as well, and how you're mentioning it. So I would fully support that. And test in a safe way what could be, what it is that you want to test and learn, and what are the initial results. And then look to see if there are other interested parties who are excited by this and want to take this forward. Now, definitely there are risks around data and tools and constraints around it, particularly if there is proprietary information from a company perspective. You don't want to be able to go beyond the systems you're using or even within the systems you're using. So of course, it needs to be done in a compliant manner, but there's different ways to address that. But I think it all begins with the mindset and the willingness to try this and seeing who else would like to join you in that journey, and then going from there. And what we typically find is that you get quick wins, or you fail quickly, and then you can pivot to something else. But where you get quick wins, people begin to hear about it. They get excited. Oh, something's happening over there. Something's being done over there. We'd like to know more. And it can begin to snowball, and then there can be more resources allocated and more senior management attention to it, which can then help scale it.
I think that's an excellent suggestion and advice, Ghaleb. I think, finding those small wins is a great proof point for leaders. Igor, I would also add, if you find case studies that are relevant, that your leaders could, possibly, review and kind of see that others within your category or others within the industry that you're in are using it. I think leaders are always looking at, what the competitive landscape is up to, and they don't want to be left behind. And I think experimentation is critical. From a data security perspective, I'd also say that many of the systems that are out there have, features that won't learn from the data that you put in them, so that your data won't be part of the learnings of others. So you can kind of isolate that data that way as well.
Right, and I'll add, while also addressing another comment, Rob, thank you for your comment. Rob comment regards our experience in managing this change and starting to implement these types of capabilities. So very related question. And what I would add is, in addition to finding a small coalition and a pilot program, we have to select that pilot very intentionally. So yes, as Ghaleb mentioned, we have to make sure we test it in a way that is responsible, but it also has to be a meaningful test that provides real value, so it can be a meaningful success story for the rest of the organization to gain momentum from. That's typically how we go into organizations and start the implementation of new capabilities in general. And what that means, the balance between significant and in a test environment changes from organization to organization, and we can help you identify where that is as applicable.
I also think what Ghaleb said early on in terms of the people aspect of this thing, that being super important. I think having a leader who pays attention, who wants the change, the leader doesn't need to be at the top of the organization, but the leader within the organization that is going to implement this, they need to pay attention, because when leaders pay attention, the rest of the team will get pulled in. If the leaders kind of bring in a new system and they don't pay attention, it's going to peter out over time. So I think that people part that Ghaleb mentioned is very critical in adoption.
Yeah, well, Ghaleb, if you have any closing words for us, I'd also like to thank all the participants for their activity in making this webinar interactive. Go ahead, Ghaleb.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Please reach out to us. So you can find us through our general email address, but you can also contact any one of us through LinkedIn or our company channels. And we will be sharing a recording of this as well, I'm sure, shortly. So you will all have access to it. And of course, feel free to share this with others in your organization. And if you would like to know more, please reach out to us and we'll happily go through a demo and a deeper discussion on some of the functionalities or just the use cases, to Kamran's point of how we've seen this done in different organizations and what they've learned and how they've benefited.